What's up, everyone? Mike back with you again on another episode of One and Done with Zeke. How's it going, Zeke?
Yo,
For today, we thought we'd continue on the PSA versus BGS discussion, but specifically focus on comparing the companies themselves. Maybe talk a little bit about each one. What are some of the things they might have in common or like are different about them? So I guess we could start with PSA, which stands for Professional Sports Authenticator, and are based in California, specifically Orange County, if I'm not mistaken.
hmm
Um, and they've been around definitely longer than Beckett. So, of the two companies, PSA is the older one.
it
Just like it,
started in the mid '80s, right? Like 80, 85, 86, somewhere around there.
yeah. They're actually a public company because they're part of Collectors Universe, which is actually uh, available to trade on the stock market. Haven't checked recently, but their market cap is pretty small compared to like some of the more established companies out there. But definitely they are public, so a lot of the information you want to find out about like their revenue and like costs and stuff is definitely available. And like it says in the name of the service, the S is for sports. That's primarily their bread and butter. Is what they really started doing. Early on when they first embarked on being able to grade memorabilia and cards. And I'd say probably today is still primarily their main focus, but they've definitely grown a lot over the years. Not just in the resources that they have for grading, but the actual kinds of things that they grade. A lot of people now are familiar with PSA because maybe not for sports, but maybe for like Pokemon cards or like Magic cards, or even Dragon Ball Super cards. So they've definitely expanded a lot since they first began, and of the two, I'd say that they're the ones that you know are the biggest in terms of submissions that they get. Last I heard is 60 something odd thousand per week in submissions that they get in the mail. Supposedly over a million backed up in queue. So definitely very very busy over there, and constant delays and like changes in like expected returns, which frustrates a lot of people. So yeah, they're basically a huge company now, and they're doing a lot outside of just sports.
Yeah, they've dipped their feet into Pokemon, Dragon Ball, Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah,
They're actually like preferred by Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh community as the preferred grading company. I mean, PSA's been around for a long time. They started with first just authenticating sports memorabilia primarily. Like they've authenticated a 1923 Babe Ruth baseball bat, baseballs from Hank Aaron and Mickey Mantle, just a whole bunch of like authentication and just to verify something's authenticity. Now in card games we always have fakes. I would say one of the things that PSA starting principle was always focused on just authenticity, and then from authenticity, things have duplicates. Like there's multiple, like we're sure Babe Ruth signed multiple baseballs, and then PSA kind of got into this medium where, well, we're authenticating it, but now there's multiple things that we've authenticated. To kind of differentiate the two, they started implementing an opinionated condition that they would write down into what they thought was a better conditioned Babe Ruth baseball to the other. So that way some people could see things a little bit more sought after. It started to make condition a factor when it comes to purchasing memorabilia. And that has expanded into card games. As some of a PSA 1 Charizard is not worth the same as a PSA 10 Charizard, or a Blue Eyes or Black Lotus, and so on and so forth. And it's because condition does matter, especially it's like, do you want a brand new Lamborghini or do you want a total Lamborghini? It comes down to one of those things where, do I want something not only authentic, but do I want it as peak perfection of quality as possible as well. And I think PSA has done a really good job of for the longest time just giving you a good sense as this is mint, this is near mint, this is played, this is damage, in both cards and in memorabilia.
That kind of talks a little bit about PSA. With Beckett, we could talk a little bit about them. One thing is that they're based in Texas, specifically Dallas, so different state entirely than PSA. They are the younger company, so they've been around, I think, since late 90s, early 2000s, something like that.
Right. From what I understand, it was a group of individuals from PSA who were graders that left to start Beckett.
Right.
That's my understanding on how Beckett came to be. So PSA has, in a sense, has an influence on how Beckett as a company works, which is cool. I think it's cool to show that there's definitely like opinions that were definitely strong enough to merit, like, we believe this should be this way, and then they believe this should be that way, and they got to a point to where they decided to start their own company and be a direct competitor. Because there's a lot of other grading companies out there for different things. There's a shit ton of sports authenticators out there, but I would say Beckett and PSA, without a shadow of a doubt, are like the top two specifically for cards. And PSA specifically for sports is up there. The one thing before we jump into Beckett, the last thing I want to say about PSA is the one thing that I'll always prefer PSA over Beckett is their autograph authentication. I adore how they will grade the signature on things.
Beckett grades it too.
I know, but PSA, to me, with their history, starting from specifically just authenticating, signatures, like that's kind of where they started. I would put that edge on PSA when it comes to autographs, just because of that was kind of like how they started, was authenticating signed sports memorabilia. And I like how they'll grade the signature as well as the card. They'll in the label it'll say autographed. That's something I've always enjoyed.
Yeah. So with Beckett, another thing about them that's a little bit unique is that they're actually not a public company. They're private. So a lot of the information that you can find available about like the business health of PSA and their parents, you won't be able to find with Beckett. That may change in the future, who knows? But as it stands today, they are a private company. And obviously they're a smaller, shop. I'm sure they have a ton of backlog as well, but I'd imagine it's nowhere near the rate of, a million in the queue with, 60,000 something every week that PSA gets bombarded with. So that's definitely another difference, is that their scale is smaller as well. And then I'd say another big difference that sometimes people forget is that PSA, because of the fact that they're a public company and because of the fact that they're a lot larger and have a lot more resources, they're actually able to guarantee insurance for your card. So for example, let's say the card turns out to be a fake. PSA guarantees like the value on it, whereas with Beckett they don't. So Beckett basically, because they're a smaller company, so they don't have the resources to offer that. So if you send something to Beckett and ends up being a fake, and you get it back and you sell it to someone, that person can't really do anything about it because Beckett doesn't offer the ability to have any kind of like liability on it. It's really on the owner. So that's one thing to consider too. Like if you're like, I'm actually a perfect example of this. Like I don't know like at all to tell the difference between a real or fake Yu-Gi-Oh card. So for me, I probably would rather trust PSA, whereas with Beckett, if I bought it and it's fake, I don't really have any kind of guarantees with the company if I find out that it's a fake. Whereas with PSA, I do. So that's also something you want to think about too.
I think for me that it draws up red flags for both in certain things.
Yeah, definitely there's trade-offs between the two.
Oh sure. Yeah, because like you and I have experienced gold and black label 10s that have flaws, and it blows my mind. And same with PSA, but PSA is more generic. So when PSA passes a flaw, I think it's one of those things where like again they have a much broader spectrum, therefore things can fall through the cracks a little bit easier, and Beckett bills itself to you because they're more expensive to grade, right? If you pick the cheapest from both, Beckett is still the more pricier one.
No,
But no,
it's actually not. No. So that's another thing that's kind of nice about Beckett, is that they still have really really fast return times for lower prices than PSA. Like PSA is so insanely backed up right now that I think like it's not even a guarantee anymore. Maybe today, but it used to be like, for example, if you wanted to get like an 8 business days grading, I think it costs like uh, I think it's like $75 or $100 or something like that.
the
Whereas
one that
with Beckett, if you do like a 2 or 3 day grading, it's like $50, $40.
so let me ask you this.
And that 8 days, obviously today wouldn't even be 8 days. Whereas with Beckett, they're still pretty good about their estimated return time. So yeah, PSA is definitely slower and pricier, I'd say.
So let me ask you this though. So with PSA, I've heard that the card they grade plays a factor in also how much you pay to get it graded. Is that true?
Correct, because you're supposed to declare the card value. So basically, for example, if you're sending a Awaken Power and you put on the form that the card is only worth $5, then that's a red flag because they're gonna be like, "What are you doing? We obviously know that this isn't a $5 card." So that helps them, you know, also being able to ensure, knowing how much the card's value is. So they definitely do care about that, and their tiers for services also are based on their, like based on the card value. So that way you don't manipulate their system, because the idea is that you don't want to send like a first edition Charizard for their bulk service, because bulk service is intended for low value items, that really, you know, just don't have much worth, so shouldn't really be treated with priority. But a lot of people try and manipulate it so that way they send a bunch of like really expensive stuff through that because they want to save on the grading cost. But that's obviously what they're trying to stop because they don't want to have to, you know, have people mess with their system. Whereas with Beckett, Beckett does that too. They actually do ask for declared value, but
But it doesn't impact the
yeah, like
the
there's no
cost.
requirements. Like if you basically like if I have like a $1 common card that I want to be going through an expedited process, like I believe with Beckett is fine, but with PSA they won't allow it because they only treat it for like high value. I believe so. I don't know for sure, but I think that's what it is. But for sure, like it plays a huge role in PSA's like form submission process, being able to provide like an accurate, like it doesn't have to be like exactly correct, but like
But
some range,
right.
some range that's like reasonable, not like crazy cheap for something that obviously most people know is crazy expensive. So
So if I were to send in a Charizard, do you know off the top of your head? Do you know how much it would be to get like a Charizard graded?
I had actually sent mine in sometime last year, and I paid for the 8 day service, and I think I had paid it was like for $75, $100. I can't remember exactly, but definitely like not like bulk. Like I'm not gonna try and sit there and tell these guys like, hey, this thing's only worth $5, so it should be a bulk grading service. But yeah, I mean definitely like PSA wants to like prevent that. Um, so yeah, I'd say that's another difference between the two guys. Obviously, everyone knows the black label is something that only Beckett offers. PSA doesn't really have a concept between like multiple kinds of 10s. It's just 10. That's it. Another difference is that PSA doesn't have a 9.5, whereas with Beckett, you know, you have the decimal system, so you do get 9.5s. So that's another difference I'd say. So if you're looking for the more granular, then definitely Beckett's your better bet. But case-wise, PSA is slimmer, smaller, whereas with Beckett's a little bit bigger, bulkier. That's probably another difference. The Beckett one has like an inner sleeve that's tight fit and like museum grade quality, whereas with PSA it's just the case itself, and then the card. There's no like intermediary layer. That's another difference I'd say between the two.
I think it's interesting that the smaller company can offers the most valuable return. If you know what I mean. So for example, this Charizard's just a great example. If Beckett were to identify and grade a Black Label 10 Charizard, which doesn't exist, first it does not exist. But if it ever were to exist, and Beckett were to grade it, it would be worth more than a PSA 10. Yet, it's funny to me because Beckett has some red flags behind it in terms of like we've seen their grading. I mean, mistakes happen, but we've seen their grading be flawed. They don't offer an insurance like PSA does for authentication.
Correct. Yes.
You know.
So I think. So here's the reason. I don't think it's because it's Beckett. I think it's because they have the details in the grade that you wouldn't get with PSA. So what I mean by that is if tomorrow, let's say PSA decides that they're gonna start showing their subgrades on labels, and show like the details behind how they were able to come up with the final grade, that like story could totally change tomorrow and be like, okay, now if you're able to get a PSA perfect 10 with all subgrades perfect 10s, that will be worth the most. So I don't think it's anything specific with Beckett. I think it's just the fact that they have those details. That's what makes collectors believe that the Beckett version of the 10 would be worth more than the PSA version of the 10.
Right, but what I'm saying is that to be so to be so granular, to be so detailed, to be so detailed,
yeah,
but then have mistakes, it is what bothers me.
Well, at the end of the day, both companies are, graded by humans. Like, there is no consistency for every single item that comes through. Like, they make mistakes just like humans anywhere make mistakes. So I think, like, in that sense, that's why I try and, like, preach, don't focus too much on the label itself, but, like, the card within the case. And to you, how much does that align with what your expectations are for the grade that it has? So that way you don't feel like you're being misguided by the label. So sometimes, as a collector, you want to focus on that and make sure that it's something that you also feel like could be a 10 or could be a black or could be whatever. So yeah. So that's that's part of the pain of having humans grade, unfortunately, is that you're gonna have mistakes happen. You're gonna have inconsistencies, and sometimes there's not much you can do about it. So I mean, worst comes to worst, I guess you could just crack it and resubmit it and see if that inconsistency happens again, or like it comes back the way you expect it to. The second time.
So let me ask. So kind of wrapping it up. Who do you prefer and why? Or does it or is it based on the game?
I think there are a few factors. I tend to go with the one that's the most popular and established because that tells me that company has the majority of experience grading, if that's the most popular one, and probably has better resources for, understanding what goes into the grade for that type of card. So definitely game by game, it's different. I'd say for the major big players out there, Magic, I prefer Beckett. Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, I prefer PSA. With Dragon Ball, it's a little bit different. I actually have kind of like a mix between the two. I basically default to PSA unless it's a card that really matters to me a lot, like I had said earlier, where I want to actually see all the details in the subgrades. So for like the Awakened Power, for example, I definitely have a preference for Beckett. But yeah, I'd say overall, I generally tend to side with PSA with Dragon Ball too. So it kind of varies.
What about with sports?
Sports is another interesting one. I'd say if it's old sports, I'd go PSA. Basically because they were around where Beckett wasn't, so they definitely have the majority of experience there, and a lot of the older sports cards are PSA already, and going through the process of crossing over is not really something I'd want to do. But if it's anything new, then definitely Beckett. So
do you care about subgrades with modern sports cards, or are you kind of like indifferent with subgrading with modern sports?
I do and I don't. Like for example, if it's like an autographed sports card, like I'm really curious to see the autograph grade on it, because that matters to me. and then also being able to see like what's the surface grade for it, because like to me it's really cool if you can find a sports card that's autographed but got a 10 surface, because that's so incredibly hard to do, right? If you imagine the player actually signing a card, but somehow the card was still kept in a way that the surface was essentially perfect. Like to me that's really really cool. So like the surface to me matters if it's like an autograph grade, and also just being able to see the grade of an autograph in addition to the normal subcategories for a grade is also something that's pretty cool.
Do you ever between the two companies ever feel like if they're grading something specific, they'll be lenient on it? Like for example, like modern trophies for Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, anything. Do you ever
No,
feel?
I've never gotten the sense of leniency. I mean, there are some conspiracies of like trying to control the pop, but I don't believe in that, because like if you look at a lot of cards out there, it's not so much like you see a ton of tens out there that shouldn't have been tens. It's just that they happen to be tens and they got tens. I don't really try and like subscribe to those kind of like crazy theories, especially at the scale of these companies. They have just so much product coming in and coming out. Like the time it takes to invest in trying to like play with the numbers to make their pop reports look good, I just don't believe it. I mean, the perfect example is like the shiny Charizard, right? That guy has over 100 black labels. So if you were like trying to be a conspiracist and say, yeah, Beckett's always like tried to force their black label numbers to be super super low, then there's no way that they would have handed out over 100 black labels for that card.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I don't really believe that.
I like to believe that their goal is to make it as hard for both PSA and Beckett is to make it as hard as possible to get a 10. And when I say hard as possible, I mean in a fair sense, because realistically, we like going through how many cards we own and everything, like we and how they get handled and all the steps they go through to get graded, like just fresh from pack.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen people get 8s, like a PSA 8 on a fresh from pack card. I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think there's definitely like a lot of like not educated players and collectors who just think that fresh from pack means, oh, it's a 10. And no, I would say fresh from pack will generally guarantee you or have a high probability of an 8. It's where you get the centering and the edges and corners perfected, which is where PSA and Beckett are really great at. At the end of the day, there is some merit to that opinion, but I think you should also not be hung up on a 10 or a 9. I think you should love the card first and then care to get a grade secondary. So.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And we'll just leave it at that. All right. Thanks again, Zeke, for your time today.
Always.
And hope you guys enjoyed this. And we'll talk to you next time.
If you guys have any questions, always feel free to leave comments below, and we'll discuss those questions in a future podcast.
Definitely. All right, guys. Take care.
Have a good one.